Hello and welcome to Sharing the Light, and I'm Reverend Griffin. Sharing the Light is an online ministry opportunity of the Sunshine Cathedral located here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Hello and welcome to Sharing the Light, and thank you for joining us today. Today we're here again with our senior pastor, the Reverend Dr. Durrell Watkins of the Sunshine Cathedral here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And today's topic is going to focus on how can I be good enough? And that's a topic I think I've been pondering lots of people's minds recently, is that in all that we do and all that we say, how can we be good enough at what we do or what we say or in life kind of in general? So how's the response to that? How can we be good enough in today's world?
Actually, I think there's what plagues us is this sense of not enoughness. You know, that we're not enough, we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we're not productive enough, that we have sort of this pathology of just buying into our own sort of emptiness or expected failure or whatever, that we have to do something to be good enough. And I think that's a real problem. And I'm afraid that religion has sort of promoted that attitude. Whether you were told, for instance, you have to have a confession once a year, and you can't eat for an hour before communion, and all of these rules, and if you break the rules, then you're obviously not good enough. Well, that's one thing. Or from another tradition, you have to say the sinner's prayer, which is, first of all, saying that you're no good, and then second of all, doing something so that something outside yourself can make you sort of good enough. One of the famous, I'll be kind to not say his name, but one of the famous reformers, Protestant reformers, compared redemption to sort of a snow-covered dung heap. That the snow covers it and it's all beautiful, but at its core it's still dung.
Right.
But grace sort of covers it like snow, and so God sees only the beauty, but at the core it's still no good. And so I just don't know how, if you really buy into that, how you can have a good sense of self. How you can really ever feel good enough. So one of the things that I think we need to do to sort of redeem ourselves so that we feel good enough is to redeem religion, to save it from that sort of thinking, that where we just assume that we are all innately depraved and that something outside of ourselves can make us just good enough, not really good, but just good enough, but only if we follow the rules, say the right prayer, belong to the right group, avoid the wrong activities or whatever. And I just don't know that is, in the 21st century, a healthy way to be a self-actualized person. And even that kind of language is different than the religious language from the last couple of millennia. The idea that a person could be self-actualized, that's from humanistic psychology, and that's from the mid-20th century. And that's the other thing, isn't it? Is that the longer we live, the more we learn, the more we discover. So now there's positive psychology, there's transpersonal psychology, there's humanist psychology, there's quantum physics, there's all kinds of things that add to how we see the world. And we can't ever unlearn a thing. We can't live our lives as if we didn't know what Freud said. And we can't live our lives as if we didn't know what Darwin said. And we can't live our lives as if we didn't know what Jung said. And we can't live our lives as if we don't know what we know. And a lot of what we claim to believe come from times when those people didn't know what we know. And so, for instance, the whole idea of the creation myth, the world is created perfect, except for the first people. And the first people get to make choices, and they can choose to be perfect or they can choose to be bad, and they choose to be bad, and because they choose to be bad, we have no choice, we're just born bad.
Right.
And so that's original sin. And well, that's a pretty good story, I guess, except then the world becomes bigger, and we realize there are other creation myths, and that's not the only one. And then we start looking at our own scriptures critically, and we see that there are two side by side in our own scriptures. And then science comes into being, and we know that maybe that's not how the world began after all. And so it's not that we began perfect and fell, it's that we began small and are constantly evolving, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and better and better and better. It's not that we fell from perfection, it's just that we haven't reached it yet, but we're evolving. And so there's all of these different ways to think that I think that we have to recognize even in our faith journeys, or we're going to make ourselves crazy.
and I guess taking a bit more of that question of how can I be good enough really takes on the tone of a lot of positive affirmation within itself. Is there enough positive affirmation in the world to redeem religion that it can become something positive again?
First of all, I want to sort of redeem one thing about religion, and that is that we're told that we have free will, that we must choose to say the sinner's prayer or to go to confession, or we have to make these choices, and we're free not to make those choices. Except we're not, are we?
Right.
Because if you don't, there are dire consequences.
Exactly.
And so it's not free will. It's do it or be punished severely and maybe eternally. Well, that's not really a choice. I mean, it's not free will. You're not free to do this, that, or the other. You're free to do this and not suffer, or you're free to do this and suffer. But that's not really freedom, like total free will. And so that's a whole setup. And I think we need to start thinking of God as being better than that. Because the God who sets us up, you'll never be good enough to that God. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
That God, you can't be good enough for. And so we've got to have a more mature, a more liberating image of God. And once we have a bigger, more liberating, more all-inclusive, all-loving God, and we believe that we are made in that God's image, well then it starts being easier to feel good enough. You can't be good enough in this old system that's a setup. And even the creation myth is a setup. You can have everything in the garden but this tree I'm pointing out to you, this tree in the middle, this tree that I'm featuring, this tree that doesn't have a fence around it. And by the way, you're 2 minutes old. Please be mature enough to say what to do. Hello.
Choose right and wrong.
Exactly. So the whole story is a setup. And so if we believe that God sets us up, then we can't be good enough. You can't please that God. But if God is the power of love within us, if God is the beauty within us, if God is the source of all good all around us, if it is in God that we live and move and have our being, if God is love and all who live in love live in God and God lives in them, well then we are already good enough. And so the task isn't to become good enough. The task is to wake up to our goodness and live into that truth.
Well, thank you for joining us here today on Sharing the Light, where we have been talking with our senior pastor, Reverend Durrell Watkins, on the topic of how can I be good enough? Again, thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, please visit us on our website at www.sunshinecathedral.org or write to me with your questions and comments at robert@sunshinecathedral.org. And now for our final word from our senior minister, Reverend Durrell Watkins.
We're so glad you were with us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Sharing the Light. If you're ever in the Fort Lauderdale area, we hope you'll worship with us at 1480 Southwest 9th Avenue. Our services are at 9 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. and 6 p.m. on Sundays. Of course, you can always watch all of our programming and read our literature on the website. You can make prayer requests, store donations on the website as well. In any case, we wish you blessings on your journey.
Thank you for joining us here on Sharing the Light.